the Virginians take up the Half-King's offer to build a trading post at the forks of the Ohio. But it's not to be. Almost immediately, French troops force the Virginians to surrender the forks and abandon their unfinished building. The Half-King is furious. By taking the forks, the French have humiliated him, and the inability of the English to fight back makes him look like he's backed the losing side.
They are here.
Washington's orders are to drive the French from this contested part of the frontier, with force if necessary. He doesn't know these French soldiers are on a diplomatic mission. The eager young major doesn't take the time to find out what the French are after.
Fire!
It's George Washington's first taste of battle, and he likes it.
I can, with truth, assure you that I heard the bullets whistle. And believe me, there was something charming in the sound. Ne tirez pas! Ne tirez pas! Arrêtez!
Their retreat cut off by Washington's Indian allies, the French surrender within minutes. Their officer sits wounded.
This is Ensign Joseph Coulon de Villiers de Jumonville. He's an envoy. Here's a letter from his commander.
I do not speak French, do you?
Under the protocol of the day, Washington is responsible for the well-being of the wounded Frenchmen. But he soon realizes that this deep in the woods, different rules apply.
Tu n'es pas encore mort, mon père.
The French have no such problems with their native allies. They arrive accompanied by 100 Shawnee, Mingo, and Delaware warriors.
About 9 o'clock on the 3rd of July, the enemy advanced with shouts and dismal Indian yells.
Washington intends to fight face-to-face in the field, European style. But the French and their Indian allies don't cooperate.
They then, from every little rising tree, bush, stump, and stone, kept up a golden, constant fire, which we returned as best we could. Till late in the afternoon, when there fell the most tremendous rain that can be conceived. Filled our trenches with water and wet not only the ammunition and the firelocks, but also the few stores that we had, leaving us only a few bayonets for defense.
By nightfall, the situation is hopeless. When the French commander offers terms for surrender, Washington signs the soggy document. Unable to read French, he relies on a Dutch officer to translate. It turns out that Jumonville's brother is taking a sweet revenge. Washington doesn't learn until later that the document includes a confession to the assassination of Ensign Jumonville. The morning after the battle, the victorious French allowed Washington to retreat towards Virginia with his wounded and tattered troops. In June of 1755, Braddock's march to the Ohio country finally gets underway. At the front of the British column, George Croyan, a Pennsylvania trader, leads the 7 remaining Indian scouts, moving quickly the last few miles toward Fort Duquesne. Captain Beauséjour's force of nearly 900 Indians, Canadians, and French regulars moves just as fast toward Braddock's column, still hoping to catch them at the river crossing. It's impossible to say who is more surprised when they encounter each other deep in the woods. The elite British Grenadiers move forward. Beauséjour leads the warriors and Canadians into the woods. He'll fight the battle the Indian way. In the beginning, it looks as if the highly disciplined British will prevail. Their volleys prove deadly immediately. Beauséjour is one of the first to fall. But once the Indians and Canadians slip into the hills on either side of the British, everything changes. Washington and the other officers struggle to keep their men in formation. The French regulars are deployed in front of the British column, blocking any forward movement. While the Indians and Canadians snipe at them from both sides. The British start to fall back, but on the narrow forest road, they collide with the troops behind them. Chaos ensues. Deadly tangles of redcoats mass together, making pathetically easy targets. The artillery proves useless in the dense woods.
Certainly not, sir. Mind your place.
The general's been hit!
It doesn't take long for the attackers to reach the rear of the British column. It is said that of the 54 women who marched with Braddock's army that day, only 4 returned.
No! No!
Some of the missing would turn up in Canada, ransomed from the Indians by the French. After 3 harrowing hours, it's over. The French and Indians have lost only 21 dead, while nearly 1,000 British and provincial soldiers are killed or wounded. Washington has had several horses shot out from under him, but is unhurt. What's left of Braddock's army makes a desperate retreat. Johnson's force is made up of Hendrick's 200 Mohawk warriors and 3,000 men recruited from the colonies. A few days after arriving, Johnson orders Hendrick to lead a detachment of warriors and colonials to reinforce his position against the French. They're unaware they're walking into a trap. Canadian Mohawk, allied with the French, don't want to shed the blood of their fellow Mohawk from New York. One calls out to warn Hendrick of the impending peril.
Hey.
For a moment, they appeal to each other as Mohawk, not to fight a white man's war. But the warning comes too late. Within minutes, Hendrick, 30 of his warriors, and 150 colonials are dead. The battle becomes known as the Bloody Morning Scout. Those who survive run 4 miles back to the encampment, where Johnson, never tested in battle, is directing the building of a hasty defense.
Come on, lads! Roll it in! Now! Now! Come on! Move! Come on now! Come on!
2 companies of French grenadiers form a column and charge the entrance to Johnson's camp.
Come on then! Atta lads! That's me. Come on! Come on then!
By the time the French get within 75 yards, Johnson's men are ready.
Stand! Now! Fire!
The fighting continues throughout the day. The Battle of Lake George proves costly to both sides. Unable to reach Lake Champlain, the best Johnson can do is build a fort securing his position at the base of Lake George. Montcalm mounts an assault on Lake George. This time, 2,000 warriors go with him. In August 1757, 150 Indian canoes accompany an armada of French bateaux gliding down the lake. In the dawn light, lookouts begin to make out the oncoming armada. Montcalm needs to get his cannons into firing range. He orders his troops to dig a network of trenches. By daylight, Monroe's forces do what they can to disrupt the French efforts.
Handle cartridge! Charge, cartridge! Ram, cartridge! Drive! Advance the piece! Ready! Fire!
Monroe continues to expect news of reinforcements at any moment. The next day, General Webb finally returns the courier with his reply. On the morning of August 6th, the siege opens as it had the previous 2 days, with the British bombardment directed at the French advance. But Montcalm's trenches are at last within range of the fort. This time, the French answered back with a burst of cannon and mortar rounds. The French artillery proves devastating. With the walls losing timber, the fort's engineer reports to Monroe. The structure may not hold for long. Surrender is Monroe's only choice. Montcalm chooses this moment to suspend the bombardment. Montcalm designs the terms of surrender to avoid repeating the events at Fort Oswego the year before. To prevent the Indians from taking captives, the British will be granted safe passage from the fort. Provisions and supplies will go to Canada. The British may keep their personal effects. The Indians can take what's left. At dawn on August 10th, the British regulars begin to leave. Trailing the regulars is a long, disorganized line of colonial soldiers and camp followers. The Indians are not about to let what they felt they'd earned simply walk away. But soldiers in the front are spared the worst of what comes next. New England troops at the back are set upon from every side. The killing, scalping, and looting lasts only a few minutes. Abercrombie has ordered a cannon bombardment, which should make quick work of the flimsy French defenses. He doesn't know that half his giant siege guns have sunk in the lake, and the others will take too long to deploy.
To the front, march! Recover your arms! To the quick time, march!
Just after noon, the highly disciplined Redcoats march uphill toward the French entrenchment, supported by American provincials. Montcalm's improvised defense proves remarkably effective. The British are slowed to a crawl. The men were cut down like grass, wrote a Massachusetts private.
The ground was strewed with the dead and dying. A man could not stand erect without being hit, for the balls came by the handful. And I could hear the men screaming and see them dying all around me.
The attacks carry on all day. The carnage continues for nearly 8 hours. The formidable Scottish Highlanders are the only British forces to get near the French wall, but even they can't prevail. Before it's over, the British and provincials will lose nearly 2,000 dead or wounded. Montcalm's casualties are only 380. Once again, the British discover that overwhelming numbers alone are not enough to produce a victory. Bradstreet's soldiers are almost exclusively colonials, from New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Rhode Island. This is their chance to show what the Americans can do for the British cause. Their goal is the French fort Frontenac at the headwaters of the St. Lawrence River. Bradstreet orders an immediate bombardment, leaving the French no opportunity to prepare their defenses. Fort Frontenac surrenders within hours. Canada's critical port on the Atlantic, Louisbourg, is falling to the British. Under heavy fire, Brigadier General James Wolfe leads his troops ashore. For 6 weeks, British and American forces lay siege to the heavily fortified city. The death knell comes when British sailors sneak into the harbor and destroy the last French battleships in Canada. The French have no choice but to surrender.
The French spend 3 years strengthening the fort. Finally, in the spring of 1759, thousands of British soldiers march into the New York frontier. Ahead of the troops at Oswego, a British Indian agent named William Johnson convinces nearly 1,000 Iroquois warriors to join the fight. On July 6th, some French soldiers hunt in the woods outside Fort Niagara. Their foray is interrupted by Iroquois warriors. They are the lead element of the British Army. The British number more than 3,000, yet they're alarmed at what they see. The French commandant, Pierre Pouchot, has created a ring of ditches and earthen walls to protect the fort from cannon fire and attacking infantry. A large powder magazine, with walls 4 feet thick, shelters their ammunition. Before fighting begins, the British offer the French one last chance to avoid bloodshed. An officer named Rutherford is sent to the French fort to request that Pouchot surrender.
As expected, Pouchot declined, saying in effect that he was expected to render honor to his king and his country, and he was not going to surrender his fortress easily. Well, the business was over at that point, and he could just as easily have sent him back to his lines, but the 18th century was in some ways perhaps a politer time, so he invited Rutherford to breakfast.
Soon, the battle for Fort Niagara would begin in deadly earnest.
The British idea is going to be to get your cannons closer and closer to the walls of the fort so that you can do more and more damage.
This was done by digging a trench, by literally digging their way toward the fort. And they would dig in a zigzag fashion so that cannon fire from the fort couldn't go straight down their trench. You didn't want to point your trench right at the fort. That was turn it into a death trap.
Each night, the British advance their trench toward the fort. It's laborious, hazardous work. The woods outside the fort were crawling with British soldiers and their Iroquois allies.
As soon as Pouchot realizes that he is in fact up against a major force, he sends word to the French posts in the Ohio Valley and to the west to fall back onto Fort Niagara, because of course if Niagara falls, all of those posts will fall in turn.
After 2 weeks of fighting, the defenders are exhausted. On both sides, ammunition is almost gone. On July 20th, British trench diggers closed to within 100 yards of the fort. That night would bring them harsh setbacks. Their second-in-command is shot dead. An hour later, they would lose their leader, Brigadier John Prideaux.
It's not exactly clear what happened other than the fact that he stepped in front of a mortar.
What actually happens is William Johnson, the Indian agent who really doesn't have any military rank, basically politics himself into a command position.
Johnson presses on with a siege. British artillery concentrates their fire on the lakeside of the fort, and the French walls begin to crumble.
Pouchot still has another ace up his sleeve, and this is these bands of French military troops and militia and so forth that are out in these western posts.
Finally, on July 23rd, a Native American brings word to the fort that help is on the way.
This same Native American courier had stopped in the British camp, and he shared the same information with the British. So everybody knew this relief force was coming down the river road.
On the morning of July 24th, some 500 British and irregular soldiers wait for a French relief force of over 1,000 men.
They waited until the French were within about 30 yards, 90 feet.
Within 30 minutes, the French attack has collapsed.
It's a very brief, very bloody affair, and it is absolutely the last nail in Pouchot's coffin in terms of defending the fort.
Pouchot decides to give up the fort and ask the British for terms of surrender.
It is 9:30. The real battle has not yet begun.
Fire!
For 30 minutes, the British artillery pummels the French line to create disorder while the army is still forming on the hill. At approximately 10 o'clock, the Battle of the Plains of Abraham begins.
Put it on!
French line that started down the hill is uncoordinated, and after a short distance, the first mistake. Someone gives the order to halt the advance and fire.
Apprêtez vos armes! En joue!
The ragged volley is pointless. The British are far out of range. The French resume the advance, their lines more confused and disordered with every step. Wolfe's soldiers wait. When the French are within 40 yards of the British, they form for their second volley. This time they can see the faces of the men in the British line. French reload, the British take position to fire. Finally, in the smoke and confusion, James Wolfe issues the most important military command of his life. The British volley is devastating. A mile-wide burst of concentrated fire. The French line is dazed, but stands its ground. As the wall of British bayonets draws closer, confusion finally crumbles the French line. Sometime just after the British volley, James Wolfe is struck by a fatal shot in the chest. At the crest of the hill, Montcalm is engulfed in a stream of retreating men. Sometime in the next few moments, he is struck by a musket ball below his ribs. Most of the French flee up the hill towards the walls of Quebec. Lévis had no choice but to retreat to Montreal. And it is here, 6 months later, that the end finally comes. 3 British armies, totaling 17,000 men, have converged on Montreal and surround Lévis.
And wanting to spare the troops part of the humiliation they were about to suffer, I ordered them to burn their flags, so they could escape the difficult task of handing them over to the enemy.
Governor Vaudreuil negotiates Canada's future. Before surrendering to the British commander, he obtains an extraordinary and enduring concession.
The free exercise of the Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman religion shall subsist entire, in such manner that all the states and the people of the towns and countries, places, and distant posts shall continue to assemble in the churches and to frequent the sacraments as heretofore, without being molested in any manner, directly or indirectly.